All right, so we are here again reading Plato's Republic. We're in Book 3. This is Book 3, Part 2. Now, the way that LibriVox set this up, Part 2 is really long. It's about 52 minutes of reading, and I like to keep these somewhere around an hour, so I suspect we're going to break Part 3, or rather Book 3, Part 2, into 3 parts. So just be aware of that. Again, we are reading The Republic, the LibriVox version, which is the Jowett translation, and I will be playing the audio, and we'll be talking about it. We are in Book 3. We just left off what sorts of things we're not going to allow in our Republic by way of art and by way of literature, specifically in this context, poetry, and the things that the poets are saying that they probably shouldn't be saying if we want to have a good Republic. Some things of that nature include what the gods are doing. The gods shouldn't be fighting. They shouldn't be quarreling. They shouldn't be lying. And people shouldn't be pretending to be people that are worse than them. They shouldn't be pretending to be animals and that sort of thing. And so basically the concept is that we should always be acting in a way or imitating things that are better than us, not things that are worse than us. So I'm going to start us off here, and I will interrupt as is necessary. We're now getting into the part that's talking about music. And I said this in the last section, but if you're following, or if you're not following, I'll say it again. The music that he's talking about, some of these things are going to be kind of hard to understand because we don't know a lot of what was happening by way of how music actually sounded in ancient Greece. So you're going to hear things that might be familiar if you're familiar with music, like the different modes, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixed Lydian, that sort of thing. But we don't really know what those actually were like back then. So it's kind of our best guess. So it's kind of hard to connect these things, but the principles remain the same. So here we go.
Book 3, Part 2 of The Republic by Plato. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. Next in order will follow melody and song. Well, that is obvious. Everyone can see already what we ought to say about them, if we are to be consistent with ourselves. I fear, said Glaucon, laughing, that the word everyone hardly includes me, for I cannot at the moment say what they should be, though I may guess. At any rate, you can tell that a song or ode has 3 parts: the words, the melody, and the rhythm. That degree of knowledge I may presuppose. Yes, he said, so much as that you may. And as for the words, there will surely be no difference between words which are and which are not set to music. Both will conform to the same laws, and these have been already determined by us. Yes. And the melody and rhythm will depend upon the words. Certainly. We were saying, when we spoke of the subject matter, that we had no need of lamentation and strains of sorrow. True. And which are the harmonies expressive of sorrow? You are musical and can tell me. The harmonics which you mean are the mixed or tenor Lydian, and the full-toned or bass Lydian, and such like. These, then, I said, must be banished, even to women who have a character to maintain they are of no use, and much less to men. Certainly. In the next place, drunkenness and softness and indolence are utterly unbecoming the character of our guardians. Utterly unbecoming. And which are the soft or drinking harmonies? The Ionian, he replied, and the Lydian.
So he's talking about the harmonies in modern music. These are the modes, different sounds that tend toward different emotions and feelings. So he already ruled out the harmonies that are expressive of sorrow, so sad stuff, and then also these kind of casual, relaxed melodies, which are conducive to drinking, I suppose.
They are termed relaxed. Well, and are these of any military use? Quite the reverse, he replied. And if so, the Dorian and the Phrygian are the only ones which you have left. I answered, of the harmonies I know nothing, but I want to have one warlike. to sound the note or accent which a brave man utters in the hour of danger and stern resolve, or when his cause is failing, and he is...
So here we're talking about the sorts of music that you might want to play for military endeavors, or if things aren't going well in military endeavors, to kind of strengthen the soul.
Is going to wounds or death, or is overtaken by some evil, and at every such crisis meets the blows of fortune with firm step and a determination to endure, and another to be used by him in times of peace and freedom of action, when there is no pressure of necessity, and he is seeking to persuade God by prayer, or man by instruction and admonition, or on the other hand, when he is expressing his willingness to yield to persuasion or entreaty or admonition, and which presents him when by prudent conduct he has attained his end, not carried away by his success, but acting moderately and wisely under the circumstances, and acquiescing in the event. These two harmonies I ask you to leave, the strain of necessity, the strain of courage, and the strain of temperance. These, I say, leave.
So we have two types of music that he wants in the Republic. We want the warlike, the stuff that we're going to play when stuff is going down, and then the stuff that we have when it's not wartime, but isn't going to be conducive to the sorts of dispositions that we're trying to avoid, drunkenness and sorrow.
And these, he replied, are the Dorian and Phrygian harmonies of which I was just now speaking. Then, I said, if these and these only are to be used in our songs and melodies, we shall not want multiplicity of notes or panharmonic scale. I suppose not. Then we shall not maintain the artificers of lyres with 3 corners and complex scales, or the makers of any other many-stringed, curiously harmonized instruments. Certainly not. But what do you say to flute-makers and flute-players? Would you admit them into our state when they reflect that in this composite use of harmony the flute is worse than all the stringed instruments put together? Even the panharmonic music is only an imitation of the flute. Clearly not. There remain then only the lyre and the harp for use in the city, and the shepherds may have a pipe in the country. That is sure.
So they ruled out these instruments because they are capable of hitting all these different modes, which we're trying to avoid some of them. So we're kind of getting rid of the instruments that would be capable of creating these tones that are negatively impacting the guardians of the state.
Surely the conclusion to be drawn from the argument. The preferring of Apollo and his instruments is not at all strange, I said. Not at all, he replied. And so, by the dog of Egypt, we have been unconsciously purging the state, which not long ago we termed luxurious. And we have done wisely, he replied. Then let us now finish the purgation, I said. Next, in order to harmonies, rhythms will naturally follow, and they should be subject to the same rules, for we ought not to seek out complex systems of metre or meters of every kind, but rather to discover what rhythms are the expressions of a courageous and harmonious life, and when we have found them, we shall adapt the foot and the melody to words having a like spirit, not the words to the foot and the melody. To say what these rhythms are will be your duty. You must teach me, then, as you have already taught me the harmonics. But indeed, he replied, I cannot tell you. I only know that there are some 3 principles of rhythm out of which metrical systems are framed, just as in sounds there are 4 notes. That is, the 4 notes of the tetrachord, out of which all the harmonies are composed. That is an observation which I have made, but of what sort of lives they are severally the imitations, I am unable to say.
So here they're going to talk briefly about meter. Again, this is the sort of thing that we can't really equate back to our own understanding of music because it's just different. So, we might not be getting the full impact here, but this section is kind of short, and then we're moving on to something that's a little more important.
Then, I said, we must take Damon into our counsels, and he will tell us what rhythms are expressive of meanness or insolence or fury or other unworthiness, and what are to be reserved for the expression of opposite feelings. and I think that I have an indistinct recollection of his mentioning a complex Cretic rhythm, also a dactylic or heroic, and he arranged them in some manner which I do not quite understand, making the rhythms equal in the rise and fall of the foot, long and short alternating, and, unless I am mistaken, he spoke of an iambic as well as a trochaic rhythm, and assigned to them short and long quantities. Also, in some cases, he appeared to praise or censure the movement of the foot quite as much as the rhythm, or perhaps a combination of the two, for I am not certain what he meant. These matters, however, as I was saying, had better be deferred to Damon himself, for the analysis of the subject would be difficult, you know. Rather so, I should say. But there is no difficulty in seeing that grace, or the absence of grace, is an effect of good or bad rhythm. None at all. And also that good and bad rhythm naturally assimilate to a good and bad style, and that harmony and discord in like manner follow style. For our principle is that rhythm and harmony are regulated by the words, and not the words by them. Just so, he said, they should follow the words. And will not the words and the character of the style depend on the temper of the soul? Yes. And everything else on the style? Yes. Then beauty of style and harmony and grace and good rhythm depend on simplicity. I mean the true simplicity of a rightly and nobly ordered mind and character, not that other simplicity, which is only a euphemism for folly. Very true, he replied. And if our youth are to do their work in life, must they not make these graces and harmonies their perpetual aim? They must. And surely...
This is something just to mention, this idea of harmony and grace. Basically, he's saying that the creations are a reflection of the souls that create them. And so when the person is well-ordered, their art is going to be well-ordered. And I think that's... I think that's pretty true, worth considering.
The art of the painter and every other creative and constructive art are full of them. Weaving, embroidery, architecture, and every kind of manufacture, also nature, animal and vegetable. In all of them there is a grace or the absence of grace, and ugliness and discord and inharmonious motion are nearly allied to ill words and ill nature, as grace and harmony are the twin sisters of goodness and virtue, and bear their likeness. That is quite true, he said. But shall our superintendents go no further? And are the poets only to be required by us to express the image of the good in their works, on pain, if they do anything else, of expulsion from our state? Or is the same control to be extended to the other artists, and are they also to be prohibited from exhibiting the opposite forms of vice and intemperance and meanness and indecency in sculpture and building and the other creative arts? And is he who cannot conform to this rule of ours to be prevented from practising his art in our state, lest the taste of our citizens be corrupted by him? We would not have our guardians grow up amid images of moral deformity, as in some noxious pasture, and there browse and feed upon many a baneful herb and flower day by day.
This is true, I think. I agree with him at least. That, this bad art or immoral art really does mess people up. And that's what he's arguing against. He's saying that the Republic shouldn't allow that sort of art to do that, to mess the people up.
Little by little, until they silently gather a festering mass of corruption in their own soul. Let our artists rather be those who are gifted to discern the true nature of the beautiful and graceful. Then will our youth dwell in a land of wealth, and amid fair sights and sounds, and receive the good in everything, and beauty, the effluence of fair works, shall flow into the eye and ear, like a health-giving breeze from a purer region, and insensibly draw the soul from earliest years into likeness and sympathy with the beauty of reason. There can be no nobler training than that, he replied. And therefore, I said, Glaucon, musical training is a more potent instrument than any other, because rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul, on which they mightily fasten, imparting grace and making the soul of him who is rightly educated graceful, or of him who is ill-educated ungraceful, and also because he who has received this true education of the inner being will most shrewdly perceive omissions or faults in art and nature, and with a true taste, while he praises and rejoices over and receives into his soul the good, and becomes noble and good, he will justly blame and hate the bad, now in the days of his youth, even before he is able to know the reason why. And when reason comes, he will recognize and salute the friend with whom his education has made him long familiar.
This is actually one of the tenets of classical education, that we use art to kind of meld the soul before we can really start bringing in logic and reason. And so by the time you start doing that, you actually have a head start, and people already know what's good and what sorts of things they ought to be looking towards. I think that's a good point. And this section here is really just kind of explaining why it's so important that we regulate art. In this case, in the Republic, but otherwise in our own ingestion of art, how we should really choose art that's going to make us better and not worse.
Yes, he said, I quite agree with you in thinking that our youth should be trained in music, and on the grounds which you mention. Just as in learning to read, I said, we were satisfied when we knew the letters of the alphabet, which are very few, in all their recurring sizes and combinations, not slighting them as unimportant whether they occupy a space large or small, but everywhere eager to make them out, and not thinking ourselves perfect in the art of reading until we recognize them wherever they are found. True. Or as we recognize the reflection of letters in the water or in a mirror, only when we know the letters themselves, the same art and study giving us the knowledge of both. Exactly. Even so, as I maintain, neither we nor our guardians, whom we have to educate, can ever become musical until we and they know the essential forms of temperance, courage, liberality, magnificence, and their kindred, as well as the contrary forms in all their combinations, and can recognize them and their images wherever they are found, not slighting them either in small things or great, but believing them all to be within the sphere of one art and study. Most assuredly. And when a beautiful soul harmonizes with a beautiful form, and the two are cast in one mold, that will be the fairest of sights to him who has an eye to see it. The fairest indeed, and the fairest is also the loveliest. Well, that may be assumed. And the man who has the spirit of harmony will be most in love with the loveliest, but he will not love him who is of an inharmonious soul. That is true, he replied.
Here we also have this spirit of harmony. Earlier the word was used grace, and it's just someone who is well ordered.
If the deficiency be in his soul, but if there be any merely bodily defect in another, he will be patient of it, and will love all the same. I perceive, I said, that you have or have had experiences of this sort, and I agree. But let me ask you another question. Has excess of pleasure any affinity to temperance? How can that be? He replied. Pleasure deprives a man of the use of his faculties quite as much as pain. Or any affinity to virtue in general? None whatever. Any affinity to wantonness and intemperance? Yes, the greatest. And is there any greater or keener pleasure than that of sensual love? No, nor a madder. Whereas true love is a love of beauty and order, temperate and harmonious. Quite true, he said. Then no intemperance or madness should be allowed to approach true love? Well, certainly not. Then mad or intemperate pleasure must never be allowed to come near the lover and his beloved. Neither of them can have any part in it if their love is of the right sort. No, indeed, Socrates, it must never come near them. Then I suppose that in the city which we are founding you could make a law to the effect that a friend should use no other familiarity to his love than a father would use to his son, and then only for a noble purpose, and he must first have the other's consent. And this rule is to limit him in all his intercourse, and he is never to be seen going further, or if he exceeds, he is to be deemed guilty of coarseness and bad taste.
So here we have this little section. Sometimes it's hard to understand exactly what they're talking about when they talk about lovers in love, because there was a lot of stuff going on back then that was different than what goes on now. So there was what's called pederasty, and it's basically this idea that that an adult male will basically take on a younger male, typically in his early teens, and in some exchange for love or companionship, typically there was a sexual element to it, the older person would teach them and basically be kind of like a what would the word be, like I don't know, a guide to that person. And so I'm not sure which they're talking about here, but all in all, the idea is that even relationships of that sort have to be temperate. And so temperance is what's kind of guiding all these interactions.
I quite agree, he said. This much of music, which makes a fair ending, for what should be the end of music if not the love of beauty? I agree, he said. After music comes gymnastic, in which our youth are next to be trained. Certainly. Gymnastic, as well as music, should begin in early years. The training in it should be careful and should continue through life. Now, my belief is, and this is a matter upon which I should like to have your opinion in confirmation of my own, but my own belief is, not that the good body by any bodily excellence improves the soul, but on the contrary, that the good soul by her own excellence improves the body as far as this may be possible. What do you say? Yes, I agree. Then to the mind, when adequately trained, we shall be right in handing over the more particular care of the body, and in order to avoid prolixity, we will now only give the general outlines of the subject. Very good. That they must abstain from intoxication has been already remarked by us, for of all persons a guardian should be the last to get drunk and not know where in the world he is. Yes, he said, that a guardian should require another guardian to take care of him is ridiculous indeed. But next, what shall we say of their food? For the men are in training for the great contest of all, are they not? Yes, he said. And will the habit of body of our ordinary athletes be suited to them? Why not? I am afraid, I said, that a habit of body such as they have is but a...
Another little difference here between the Greeks and now. They talk a lot about food. Basically, food is medicine. It's a good point. There's a lot to it. So when they talk about eating and drinking and sleeping, this is sort of like the way that people stay healthy. And take that in mind when we talk about the sleepy sort of person, these athletes.
Sleepy sort of thing, and rather perilous to health. Do you not observe that these athletes sleep away their lives and are liable to most dangerous illnesses if they depart, in ever so slight a degree, from their customary regimen? Yes, I do. Then, I said, a finer sort of training will be required for our warrior athletes, who are to be like wakeful dogs, and to see and hear with the utmost keenness, amid the many changes of water and also of food, of summer heat and winter cold, which they will have to endure when on a campaign. They must be liable to break down in health. That is my view. The really excellent gymnastic is twin sister of that simple music which we were just now describing. How so? Why, I conceive that there is a gymnastic which, like our music, is simple and good, and especially the military gymnastic. What do you mean? My meaning may be learned from Homer. He, you know, feeds his heroes at their feasts, when they are campaigning, on soldiers' fare. They have no fish, although they are on the shores of the Hellespont, and they are not allowed boiled meats, but only roast, which is the food most convenient for soldiers, requiring only that they should light a fire, and not involving the trouble of carrying about pots and pans. True. And I can hardly be mistaken in saying that sweet sauces are nowhere mentioned in Homer. In proscribed...
So this is all stuff that they're not supposed to be eating, and you'll see soon that how this idea of food as medicine comes in based on what Homer is suggesting these warriors eat.
Describing them, however, he is not singular. All professional athletes are well aware that a man who is to be in good condition should take nothing of the kind. Yes, he said, and knowing this, they are quite right in not taking them. Then you would not approve of the Syracusan dinners and the refinements of Sicilian cookery? I think not. Nor, if a man is to be in condition, would you allow him to have a Corinthian girl as his fair friend? Certainly not. Neither would you approve of the delicacies, as they are thought, of Athenian confectionery? Certainly not. All such feeding and living may be rightly compared by us to melody and song composed in the panharmonic style and in all the rhythms. Exactly. There complexity engendered license, and here disease. Whereas simplicity in music was the parent of temperance in the soul, and simplicity in gymnastic of health in the body. Most true, he said. But when intemperance and diseases multiply in a state, halls of justice and medicine are always being opened, and the arts of the doctor and the lawyer give themselves airs, finding how keen is the interest which not only the slaves but the freemen of the city take about them. Of course. And yet, what greater proof can there be of a bad and disgraceful state of education than this, that not only artisans and the meaner sort of people need the skill of first-rate physicians and judges, but also those who would profess to have had a liberal education? Is it not?
So here, lawyers and doctors are seen kind of in the same light. Like if your body is messed up because you've done too much, you've eaten poorly, and you haven't exercised and you've not taken care of your body because you're intemperate, the doctor has to come fix that. If your soul is all messed up and you're immoral and you get yourself in trouble, the lawyer comes and has to kind of get you out of that situation. So basically, when you're not well ordered based on your own decisions, whether it be through temperance or other virtues, you need to be fixed by someone else.
Disgraceful, and a great sign of want of good breeding, that a man should have to go abroad for his law and physic because he has none of his own at home, and must therefore surrender himself into the hands of other men whom he makes lords and judges over him. Of all things, he said, the most disgraceful. Would you say most, I replied, when you consider that there is a further stage of the evil, in which a man is not only a lifelong litigant, passing all his days in the courts, either as plaintiff or defendant, but is actually led by his bad taste to pride himself on his litigiousness. He imagines that he is a master of dishonesty, able to take every crooked turn and wriggle into and out of every hole, bending like a withy and getting out of the way of justice. And all for what? In order to gain small points not worth mentioning, he not knowing that so to order his life as to be able to do without a napping judge is a far higher and nobler sort of thing. Is not that still more disgraceful? Yes, he said, that is still more disgraceful. Well, I said, and to require the help of medicine, not when a wound has to be cured or on occasion of an epidemic, but just because, by indolence and a habit of life such as we have been describing, men fill themselves with waters and winds as if their bodies were a marsh, compelling the ingenious sons of Asclepius to find more names for diseases, such as flatulence and catarrh. Is not this, too, a disgrace?
So this idea that you would need to go to a doctor because you are just intemperate, because you eat too much, or because you exercise too little, or because you drink too much, and you just mess up your body so much that you have to go to a doctor. This is what he's talking about. Not good.
Yes, he said. They do certainly give very strange and new-fangled names to diseases. Yes, I said, and I do not believe that there were any such diseases in the days of Asclepius. And this I infer from the circumstance that the hero Eurypylus, after he has been wounded in Homer, drinks a posset of Pramnian wine well besprinkled with barley meal and grated cheese, which are certainly inflammatory, And yet the sons of Asclepius, who were at the Trojan war, do not blame the damsel who gives him the drink, or rebuke Patroclus, who is treating his case. Well, he said, that was surely an extraordinary drink to be given to a person in his condition. Not so extraordinary, I replied, if you bear in mind that in former days, as is commonly said, before the time of Herodicus, the guild of Asclepius did not practice our present system of medicine, which may be said to educate diseases. But Herodicus, being a trainer, and himself of a sickly constitution, by a combination of training and doctoring, found out a way of torturing first and chiefly himself, and secondly the rest of the world. How was that? He said. By the intervention of lingering death. For he had a mortal disease which he perpetually tended, and as recovery was out of the question, he passed his entire life as a valetudinarian. He could do nothing but attend upon himself, and he was in constant torment whenever he departed in anything from his usual regimen, and so, dying hard by the help of science, he struggled on to old age. A rare reward for his skill. Yes, I said, a reward which a man might fairly expect who never understood that if Asclepius did not instruct his descendants in valetudinarian arts, the omission arose, not from ignorance or inexperience of such a branch of medicine, but because he knew that in all well-ordered states every individual has an occupation to which he must attend, and has therefore no leisure to spend in continually being ill. This we remark in the case of the artisan, but ludicrously enough do not apply the same rule to people of the richer sort. How do you mean? He said. I mean this. When a carpenter is ill, he asks the physician for a rough and ready cure, an emetic or purge or a cautery or the knife. These are his remedies. And if someone prescribes for him a course of dietetics, and tells him that he must swathe and swaddle his head,
All right, so here real quick, it's worth looking at this idea of medicine to cure somebody or medicine to kind of prevent death. And I think he's arguing that more recently in this time, they've been just kind of using medicine to fend off symptoms and difficulties and keep you alive, but not really keep you alive in a way that's helpful. Like you're still kind of, what would the word be? You know, you're kind of not all there. You've lost a lot of your faculties. You're giving up a lot using these remedies that keep you from actually working hard and actually performing your duty as a citizen or as a person. And so he's saying that when a carpenter is ill, someone who actually has to work for his money or his life, he's not going to be able to do these sorts of things where he has to take 6 months to get better. He's going to say, okay, fix me or let me die, because I'm going to die either way.
And all that sort of thing, he replies at once that he has no time to be ill, and that he sees no good in a life which is spent in nursing his disease to the neglect of his customary employment, and therefore, bidding good-bye to this sort of physician, he resumes his ordinary habits, and either gets well and lives and does his business, or, if his constitution fails, he dies and has no more trouble. Yes, he said, and a man in his condition of life ought to use the art of medicine thus far only. Has he not, I said, an occupation? And what profit would there be in his life if he were deprived of his occupation? Quite true, he said. But with a rich man this is otherwise. Of him we do not say that he has any specially appointed work which he must perform, if he would live. He is generally supposed to have nothing to do. Then you have heard of the saying of Philoclades, that as soon as a man has a livelihood he should practice virtue? Nay, he said, I think that he had better begin somewhat sooner.
All right, so this is the halfway mark of the second part of Book 3, and I think we'll probably cut it off here. That way the stream doesn't get too long. I'd like to keep these within an hour, and we're definitely there now. So, it looks like someone's here asking questions. Well, that's cool. So that I can actually answer that question, when he says he would die, it means that there is, you're going to die from one of two things. You're gonna either die because you because the disease is killing you, because he's talking about someone that has a disease, right? So either the disease is going to kill you, or otherwise you're going to not eat, right? Because if you have this treatment that's going to take you 6 months or whatever to make your disease go away, this person is has to work to live. So if he can't work, then he's not going to live. And that's what he's trying to say, is that there's a certain people can't afford to be sick for a really long time, and they have to either get better or they have to die. And of course that's that's a harsh way of putting it, but that's basically what he meant there. So yeah, that's that. Keep in touch if you're here. I'll be starting another stream here pretty soon. We'll be just answering general questions. So if that's something that you're interested in, check that out. Otherwise, we'll see you for Book 3, Part 3 of the Republic next time.